There we go. Hello, hello, and welcome to the Twisted Tales Studio. We call ourselves the Horror Agnostic Channel here because we play all sorts of spooky games, read all sorts of spooky books. And today we are doing something a little bit different. I have here with me today Benjamin Rivers from BancyCo, creator of Worse Than Death, which is a very fun indie horror game we're going to talk about in just a minute. Why don't you introduce yourself? Tell us a little bit
Hey,
about yourself.
sure. Yeah, I'm a veteran indie game dev here in Toronto. So I've been around for BancyCo's been around for about 10 years. We just rebranded as BancyCo last year. Otherwise, we were known under my own name, which is not cool because then my wife was like, "I don't want a business card with just your face on it. It's stupid." So now we're called BancyCo. And yeah, I make horror games, adventure games, and draw comics.
Awesome. So in terms of your background, have you always wanted to get into making games? Like, was that your goal going into school, or did it happen a bit more organically?
So the answer is yes and yes. There was no school for anything related to this when I went to school, for sure. I'm a bit of an oldster, so I grew up with my first console was an Intellivision, and so I was basically doing game design documents and manuals, I guess you'd call them, for Intellivision games that I wanted to make while playing. So my earliest memories of playing games also involved trying to make them. So I remember something I've always talked about is this like terrible junkyard brawler game I designed with Intellivision style pixel art. Wish I still had those pages, but and then I would do that for everything I ever got. Like I design NES games, Game Boy games. I'd make manuals for like this silly fishing game. I remember doing something like that. So I'd always been making some kind of interactive game, at least on paper. And then I remember I got to go into this special program at school when I was in elementary school, and we got to do a lot of really cool arts related stuff. And that's where I met all like the kids who were like way better than I was at art and whatever other creative pursuits. And we made a board game. That was the first game I ever designed, technically, with this team. We made some kind of, I don't even remember what it was called, but some kind of like very standard board game. You know, we drew all the cards you picked up and the board and all that kind of stuff. And that just kind of kept things going from there. And then I made in the '90s, I made Doom levels and Wolfenstein levels and things like Duke Nukem levels, and tried to kind of keep up with sort of making game related stuff then. But I didn't get to make games until like officially until I mean mid 2000s, I guess, when that was sort of possible here.
That's awesome. Yeah, I think a lot of the people that I've talked to that have made games, like, there isn't, or there wasn't a lot of places to actually go study it now. I think for us in Toronto now, Sheridan does it, but
And OCAD, because I taught
OCAD
at
does it.
OCAD University for 13 years, and I actually taught their game design program, or sorry, one of their game design classes, I should say. For about 6 years, I did that.
Oh,
Um,
wow.
but yeah, the first game related school I remember hearing about was Digipen, which was partially sponsored by Nintendo, and this was in the late '90s, I believe. And it was in Vancouver because Nintendo's in Washington, so there was a bunch of stuff going on across the border. And I knew about it because of game magazines I was reading at the time, and I was like, "What is this mythical place where people can learn to make video games? Like, I want to go there." And I grew up, I was in Ontario at the time, and I knew there was no chance I was getting to go to Vancouver to go to video game school. So I went and did graphic design and other things instead.
Yeah, all the cool stuff was in Vancouver first, and then it finally started trickling over to Ontario, I found.
That's right.
So in terms of like playing games in your spare time, what sort of games do you play when you're not making games? Like, is it similar
It,
to what you make?
well, yes, yes, and no. I, I tend to make the kind of games I want to play, and even like the new game we're working on now is something that Nancy and I is just a game we want to play, so we're making it essentially. So there's a reason why I make certain kinds of games or that I like kinds of certain kinds of content or types of story because those are the things I also gravitate towards. So I will play. I love adventure style games, anything with a good story, essentially. But as an example, I recently played Guardians of the Galaxy on PS5, which was a Canadian developed game too, and everyone in that game has Canadian accents, which is great. But I really love that because I didn't realize it had such a huge emphasis on story and player decisions and ramifications of your choices, and all that kind of stuff made it really appealing to me. But I don't play like Souls like games or things like that, or something that's like really hardcore mechanics. If chances are, if a game has a difficulty mode that says like story, mode, or whenever they have the little tagline that says like, oh, for people who just want to join the story, that's the selection I make every single time. So I will play like JRPGs and things like that, but not so often because they take too much time and I don't have a lot of patience, or rather, I just don't have enough time. But I love finding indie games or something that's shorter, especially something that has a really strong narrative hook.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, something a little more story focused. I feel you there. I do the exact same thing. It's like, where's the easy mode? I just want to experience, especially
Yeah.
with things like horror games. I know I also I play a lot of things like Silent Hill and Resident Evil growing up, so I just want to get to the scares more than anything else.
It's funny too because I feel like a bit of a hypocrite because of Worse than Death. We have no easy mode. We only have normal, hard, and nightmare. So I'm not sure. I'm not sure what I was doing with that.
Mwahaha, you guys don't get off easy.
So I knew someone would dig it.
Yes. Yes. From what I've played of the game so far, because I picked it up myself, it's been a ride. It's been a lot of fun.
That's great.
So why don't you tell us a little bit about what is now BancyCo? Is
Sure.
is that you mentioned your wife works with you as part of the company?
Yeah, that's right. So essentially, what happened was we started, or like I sort of started a company about 10 years ago. It'll be 10 years this summer, because I was freelancing and we released Home, which was 2012. Yeah, it'll be the 10th year anniversary of Home this year. Wow. And I had to get incorporated because in order to release on Steam, you have to be like a real company. You can't just be some rando, or at least back then, it couldn't just be some rando trying to put a game out. So we had to like rush to the office and get a real corporation incorporated so I could start doing that kind of stuff. And I was doing it to get the game on Steam because they told me I had to do it. And then I assumed that nothing was going to come of it. So I just named the company after myself because I thought, well, at least this way I can just keep using this name to do freelance work. And then the game was like a surprise hit on Steam. And then that at the end of that year is when I said, you know what? I'm going to transition away from doing my freelance work and I'm going to become a full time game developer. And then, of course, we just had the company name for 9 years. And we've been wanting to rebrand for quite a while. So it's my wife, Nancy, and I, hence the name BancyCo, who've been working on this stuff for the past 10 years. She sort of has her own work that she does as well. But we're just a tag team on everything. We've been married for, well, last year was our 20th wedding anniversary, so it's been a long time. So we're sort of we do everything together in that regard. And um, now what we're doing with our new game is we're working with external partners to do a bunch of other stuff that we didn't do ourselves. But in the core team, we're like the design, story, concept unit. And the way it usually works is, for example, say if I have an idea or I want to pitch a concept for a game, it's got to make it past Nancy first. And if there's something that she's like, nah, then we have to make a decision about what that means. Like, are we just not going to do it, or is it going to have to be a smaller game? Um, so we tend to bounce back and forth on that kind of stuff, and we argue about like fine details about character designs and story beats and whatnot. So the core of all that stuff is us. But because we're in Toronto, where there's just like a lot of great people who do stuff, both technical and creative and all that, we're pretty fortunate that we just have had made these great partnerships for many years. So the person who's helping us, like the person who's helping us with art on our new game, did all the backgrounds of Worse than Death. And we met him because he replaced a person who did all the backgrounds and tons of art in Alone with You, and then he's had other stuff to do, so we sort of hired this new person. And it's like over the like previously we would basically do everything ourselves,
Hmm.
design, development, publishing, marketing, public relations, community management, whatever. And as we've sort of grown and put out more games, we have like more babies to feed and more things to worry about. So thankfully now we're sort of growing a bit where we can work with other people who can handle some big things like who have technical chops and take on more art duties, so that Nancy and I can handle like writing, design, you know, biz dev stuff, like all that kind of just company stuff you have to deal with. So now we're sort of like the mom and pop of this slightly larger company that's got more people, working away in it.
Hmm. Yeah, you're having to do a little bit more administration, I guess,
Lots.
and delegate.
Yeah. A lot of people, like I said this when I was teaching before, was a lot of people would want to start their own company. And I would say, like, do you want to spend 90% of your day answering emails? Because if you do, absolutely start your own company. If that's not what you want to do, you're going to have to think about that.
Yeah. Oh man. Yeah, I worked as an artist for a number of years, and the one thing that always just I tell people is you're going to end up doing a lot more non-art stuff than you would really like.
Hmm.
Has the pandemic made it any sort of difference in how you guys are working? I know these days I feel like it's just much easier to work remotely anyway, so.
That's a good question because for us, we've always done work from home. Like our this office you see here is our home office. So this is where the magic happens. So for us, there wasn't really a transition. What actually ended up happening was that certain things became easier for us because events that we would normally go to, like GDC or E3 or whatnot, like we couldn't go to, but what that meant was we didn't have to, and there were online versions that we could then plug into and still meet people and do pitches and do networking and stuff like that. And I was like, I don't know about you, but I could get used to not flying 6 hours to San Francisco just to meet a couple people and get business done. So certain opportunities have certain happened, and that wouldn't have happened before. So it's actually been good for us in that regard.
Yeah, I guess it's really opened it up in that you can go to more events, quote unquote.
There's a thing too with a lot of developers because we've made lots of developer friends over the years, of course, and there are lots of people in the States. There are lots of people here in Toronto and across Canada, but lots of people in Europe and all over. And I think as North Americans, we often forget that there's a huge contingent of people who don't live on this continent who also have huge contributions to the gaming industry. So whenever there's an event, which is almost always like the biggest events are sort of North American focused, a lot of people are the ones who got to like put their lives on hold for a long time, make these massive trips, by plane, have jet lag for weeks and deal with all this stuff. Whereas like if you're in San Francisco, like every event happens 2 blocks or like, like a 15-minute Uber ride from your apartment. So it's easy for you, but for everyone else, it's like a huge endeavor. So anything that removes that part is a-okay by us.
Yeah, for sure. So what was the first game you said you released out into the world? That was Home, correct?
That was our first commercial game. Yeah. Technically, the first game I finished and released was Snow, which was like a 5-minute adventure game I made in Adventure Game Studio back in 2008, 2010? I forget. And I'd been working on a graphic novel called Snow, which we released in sort of chapters and eventually released as a full graphic novel. And I was part of a thing called the Artsy Games Incubator here in the city, which was just that. It was an introduction for people who were probably more artistic and didn't have programming backgrounds. And it was a 6-week program that got us to just make stuff and share it with our group and whatnot. I have very fond memories of that time because it was stressful because it was so scary to just be like, I thought I was like the person least qualified to be there, and then have to sort of go through these exercises of making levels and of with other games that existed, and eventually sort of designing your own thing. And I remember I was exhibiting Snow and some other art stuff at a not a gallery, but it was creative event. I've already forgotten what it's called. They had several of these before, and I was doing the classic game dev thing where I was finishing the game at my desk where I was supposed to be selling books because I had screwed something up and had to get something done in time. Well, like everyone else in the class was pretty much done. It was basically like a manga, and then I, whatever, exported the file and then ran the USB drive over to wherever it needed to be so they could load it onto whatever demo machine they had waiting for me. So that was my first finished game, which you can still find online today. And then Home is our first commercial game,
That's
which was
awesome.
2012. Yeah.
2012. Yeah, that's awesome. Photo finish. That's the way to do things.
Whenever I see my own students freaking out like last minute to get something done, I just have memories of that exact moment. I can be mad at them, but I also kind of get it.
It's like a rite of passage, right?
It's true.
Hold on just one second. What experiences, I guess, from those early projects are you carrying forward now? Like those learning experiences where, oh crap, you broke something or you tried something and it just didn't work out. Did any of those events throughout your career inform how you work now?
Yeah, we learn very often. That's a weird way to say it, but we sort of take note very often and be like, what are we learning? Nancy and I have debriefs of every project or even sort of major sections of projects. We sort of have postmortems of everything, and we discuss the stuff regularly because we are experienced now that we can see when like a painful moment's coming from a mile away and say like we can dodge this if we're smart, but we got to do it.
Abort
And
mission.
yeah, that's right. And like remember what we did last time. So a couple of things are just time management is the major thing. I gave this talk many years ago about being an indie game dev and just about how many hats you have to wear, like we just discussed. But mostly it was about learning how to time manage when you have to play a few important roles. So a lot of smaller devs, essentially have to be their own boss and their own employee, which is a weird situation to be in. And it can be really hard to switch roles when you need to and understand, what's the most important thing I should be doing right now, and how do you do it without burning out or just wasting a lot of time or money or driving yourself totally nuts. So a lot of the key lessons were not about like um, how to make a game specifically, but about how to make a thing and just survive that and be smart about it. So we over the years have come up with a whole bunch of processes internally, and I also read a lot of like quote unquote self-help books, like management books and stuff like that that I've recommend other people that have helped me kind of figure things out a little bit more efficiently. And to just find those moments of like, when when you think you're doing really well in a game design process and you just realize like you're going to crash and burn 2 weeks because you just didn't figure out a bunch of stuff. Like, how do you avoid that? And then we start writing this stuff down, documenting, saying like, do this first. Don't forget to do this. Talk to people. Ask these questions before you invest a bunch of time in doing whatever you think is important. So a lot of it is just like that, learning how to juggle that, and also learning how to prioritize tasks, like not freak out. Um, Sometimes I think this with the amount of work that we do. Uh, Sometimes I'm amazed that we just like calmly roll through like 18 months of development and just get stuff done because every 2 weeks you're like, this could all come crashing down around us, and somehow you just figure out how to like breathe and get through it. But some of that was, like we said, trial by fire.
Mm.
Just learning what it was like to do everything the wrong way and going, okay, important note, don't ever do that.
Do not do that again. Yes, for sure. And learning to take those things in stride too. So important, especially when it's something as creative as making games, because that's like your baby.
Yeah, it's I think the relationship that Nancy and I have is so important because if I show her something and she says no, like I know it's a no. I know that there's a reason for that no. And as much as I could try to defend it or whatnot, like a design or concept or whatnot, but if it doesn't get past her, I know it's correct. Her no is always correct. So it's about looking at what's the why behind the no, and maybe there's a new solution. There's some other way to approach it or a completely different idea. But being able to have that conversation, I'm sure there's you often hear about studios or not just game studios, but other places where like management and employees or whatnot don't work well together, and people aren't leading people, and they don't have that sort of back and forth. And we're very fortunate that we can kind of just have those conversations. And as much as I'll get mad sometimes when I hear that no, be like, because I thought I nailed it or got this great idea, she's like 99.9% right.
Yeah, she's like, let's rein it back in. Let's rein it back in.
It's pretty funny. We have because I'm the one who sort of like I always joke that between the two of us, I'm like a hyperactive little dog. Just imagine like a corgi running around, like a living room, and she's like a cat just watching me run around. And eventually, she just puts her paw out and she just says like, "No, it's time to sit down for a second." And that's kind of how our creative process works.
That's awesome. So in terms of actually building the games, what sorts of tools are you using on the back end right now to build your games?
So for our first three games, we used exclusively Game Maker Studio, or whichever version. It was called something different before, but so Home, Alone with You, and Worse Than Death were done with Game Maker Studio. And I learned how to use the older version of Game Maker back when I was doing that artsy games incubator stuff. Back in the day when I didn't even know how to code anything, it was so funny. And we, oh man, we've done like a lot in that. And it's kind of funny because we've grown along with that software as well as it's sort of grown and more people do it. And, people be like, oh, I didn't know you could even make games with that. And then I'm like, dude, Undertale was made in that. Or like Hyper Light Drifter, like all these other games that are way bigger and sort of renowned than our stuff. There's lots of big stuff that's made in Game Maker Studio. For our current game, we're working. Well, I probably shouldn't say anything just yet. So I'll just say we are working with a variety of tools, and we're doing some different things this time around, which has been pretty cool. And in terms of like creative stuff, like art
Mhm.
assets, design things like that, we use a bunch of things. Like Nancy and I come from graphic design; that's our background before games. So we're using a lot of like Adobe stuff and just whatever we can get our hands on. The most fun thing though was during Worse Than Death, I got an iPad Pro and then upgraded to a larger iPad Pro because I realized I could do art on it because the Apple Pencil came out and App Procreate came out. So all of the high res art that you see in Worse Than Death, like the character portraits and stuff like that, was like the puzzle scenes, it's all just drawn by me, probably in a coffee shop, like on my iPad. And a bunch of that kind of stuff has been really cool. So like for a new game, we have a really cool process where it's almost like a comic where I work up to a certain point, and then hand off files to the other artist who then takes those files and does other stuff to them to animate and rig them and do cool things. And that stuff's just, I can talk about that stuff forever. It's super cool. I'm just amazed by what you can do from the comfort of an iPad. You can create like 90% of anything you'd ever want to make.
Yeah, for sure. It's so much more accessible than one would think, because you wouldn't think like, oh, my little tablet, I can make art, which then I can then put into a game.
Yeah. It's, I'm excited for the day when I can essentially just use my iPad Pro to like work on a game, like develop stuff, do more things like that with the tools that I'm used to working on a desktop machine. But I love how much like design, thinking, notation, documentation, art, whatever, research, all that stuff I can essentially just do, on a tablet.
Yeah, I've got the Microsoft equivalent to that, and I pretty much do the exact same thing. It's so
Cool.
convenient. Definitely game changing as far as getting work done.
I think all of the backgrounds in Alone with You were done on a Surface because the artist Gavin, who was working with us on that, had a like a really sweet Surface at the time, and he just was like, "Wait a minute, why am I staying at home?" And he was able to go wherever he wanted to get all that stuff done.
Yep, Surface Pro. That's what
Yeah,
I've got too. It's pretty awesome. In terms of your games, I know it's like picking your favorite child, but which game was the most fun to work on, do you
ooh,
think?
so most fun to work on.
Yeah.
I can tell you what my favorite game of ours is, but most fun to work on is a different thing entirely. My favorite
Mhm.
game that we made is Worse Than Death. Um, I just like it a lot. It's like a culmination of kind of everything I wanted to do for quite a long time. Most fun to work on. I mean, that kind of was too because it actually went very quickly. It was a pretty quick process. Along with You was a painful development experience because I made a lot of mistakes being like, how do we do this? Or how do we make these decisions? And there's a bunch of lessons that I logged back when we made Alone with You that I'm using on our current game where I'm like, remember, don't do all this dumb stuff you did, whatever, 5 years ago. And then when it came to Worse Than Death, that was a much smoother process. It was also a smaller process. Like we had a smaller team and just said, let's just make a fun thing fast and whatever. It's not going to cost a lot to make. I just want to do something cool. And that was really fun because we prototyped really, really quickly. I think it was within 3 months. Essentially, we had all of the core mechanics built in, like a version of the puzzle sequences, the running and hiding mechanics, and a bunch of like some of the monster stuff. And so I remember demoing that to like PlayStation, some other, and like Apple and some other people, and kind of being like, man, three months ago this thing didn't exist, and now I'm having these meetings and sort of showing this stuff off and trying to get some interest in it. And that was a lot of fun. That sort of fast momentum is really good. When you're in the slog, like in the middle, I call it the development forest. It's like it's a dark forest. You have no idea where the edges of the forest are. You just know that you have to keep moving, and eventually you'll find your way out. Um, that's always not as fun. And a lot of Alone with You was just like we got in the forest real fast, and then we just spent a lot of time wandering those dark woods before we finally saw a path that led out and said, here we are. This is where we were trying to go the whole time.
Yeah, you get out of that honeymoon phase and you're just like, oh no, here's where the real work starts.
Yeah. One of the things I learned about creative stuff like comics and games is that from the outside, everything looks super fun, and a comic is a good example. From the inside, it's like just rote labor. It's just labor and organization for the most part. You can find the fun within it, but there's a lot of not fun stuff to make it work correctly.
Mm-hmm. But in the end, it's all worth it.
That's right.
Exactly. So speaking of Worse Than Death, can you tell us in your own words what that game is about?
Yeah, it is a game about a high school reunion that goes horribly wrong. So you play as a main character named Holly, who's returning to her small town that she doesn't like, and she's meeting her best friend Flynn, and they're going to their high school reunion. I think like probably like a 10-year reunion or something.
Mhm.
And then she's got kind of carrying some secret with her and something that's kind of weighing on her. And Flynn's had some recent trauma, so they sort of meet. They're not in the best position, and then they go to the reunion, just try to stomach it, like one evening with a bunch of people they don't really want to see, and then something goes totally sideways, and then this like really fast paced X-Files style like horror mystery just hits, like begins, and it never lets up until the final scene.
Yeah, it takes off, that game. I rather enjoyed like that opening sequence.
That's awesome.
Mm-hmm. So how long did Worse Than Death take to make?
Like I said, that was very quick. Not
Yeah.
our quickest. Home was the quickest because it was such a small game. Let's see, probably about 15 months or something like that. I don't know. It was, but yeah, just over a year and a half, 1.25 years. Like I said, it development kicked off nice and fast. There was a bit of a lull when I was trying to figure out a few things in the middle. But for the most part, it was moving quite quickly.
Mm-hmm.
And the difference about that, or the surprising thing about that, was that I went back to doing I was doing all the dev, I was doing a significant portion of the art, but also we had Nick, who we worked with for a long time, doing all the backgrounds, and he's amazing. So he made everything a lot easier. I did most of the sound design and things like that, and it was a very sort of like garage band, punk rock way to make a game in a way.
Mm-hmm.
But somehow it all just moved really fast. I remember being extremely stressed out at the end because we did some stuff really fast at the end to get it out on Xbox. Um, but I remember most of it being like pretty okay in
Yeah.
terms of timeline.
Did the scope creep at all? Like, did you set kind of like a date where you wanted to get it done? And because I know sometimes the ideas exceed the time limit.
Right, and that's one of those things that I was mentioning before about experiences taught us. one thing I always say with my students is they would come to me with their design docs for the game they want to build during my class. I'm like, cool, great idea. So you're going to do like maybe 20% of that if you're lucky. So just cut all of your ideas down to like a quarter or a third. So a lot of what I do in real time is working on a game is like, oh, we should do this. Oh, this is great. And then you go, okay, take that idea and cut it down to a quarter. Can you still do that? If so, then that's what you're going to end up with. So the scope ended up being pretty good. What happened at the end that was different was that we kind of like, well, we launched it on iOS first because Apple gave us a lot of support. And then we launched it on like PS4, Switch, and Xbox and Steam all at once, which was a lot. And that was kind of tough. So the only thing that really creeped in scope there was that we added an Xbox SKU that we weren't planning on. We're kind of hoping for, but weren't planning on right away. But in terms of the content, I had a bunch of stuff in there that got cut, but it wasn't like massive amounts of or like levels that were just like, oh no, we have to chop it in half just to get it out. It was more that to make the game have a certain pace and to keep our sort of like core pillars of like it's got to feel fast paced. You're always moving from one scene to the next. It's no long drawn out moments. Like nothing should ever feel like a slow burn. um, I would have things in the game where I'd have sketched out puzzles and say like this shouldn't be here. Like we just got to get to the next scene faster. One example was in the original version of the game, the first puzzle you did was actually before you got into the gym for the high school reunion. So when you meet Flynn outside your high school and you go in for the scene, there was originally going to be there's a path that you sort of look at, and you were going to go down the path and then do a little puzzle, which would then give sort of a story clue that would pay off later on, and then you would get into the reunion. And I wanted to do that to have like a certain kind of interactive moment at the beginning, but um, I realized that the longer we sort of sat there, the longer it would take to get to the fun part, which is what happens right after the high school reunion. And I wanted to get to there faster. So that was an example of something that was sort of like in there for a while. And then we just said, you know what? This doesn't need to be here. Like, cut it.
Yeah, it didn't serve the pacing.
Right. So, but it's one of the, I sometimes I've like had other devs ask me this too about the game. Like, don't you hate it when you release a game? Like, I bet you released the game and you were like, oh man, nothing I've done. I didn't put in, like it wasn't the game I wanted to make. And I was like, no, that game was 98% of everything that we had laid out on paper that we wanted to make. Like all the story beats were there, all the puzzles I was most excited to design were there. Like there was more stuff actually that we added because getting to use the iPad, I was like, wait, I can do art way faster than I thought I could. So we can add more puzzles and like close up scenes and stuff. I was like, F it. Like they're super easy to put in. Let's just throw in as many as I can stomach. So the scope creeped in the same amount of time it was able to cram in more stuff, but we never ballooned. It was a really tight schedule.
Yeah.
And Nancy was the one who's like, you got to get this game done by this time. Otherwise, you're just burning money. Like, don't do it.
Yeah. That's awesome. That's one of the few times I've ever heard of the scope creep being in like a good way. So that's awesome to hear.
It's super fun. Like when I talk to artists, I love talking to other comic artists and whatnot, and people sort of pass their secrets along about something they do to help them, get through some art slog faster. And I'm like, wait, you can just do what? And they're like, oh yeah, when I do backgrounds, like I do this, and then I don't have to worry about these problems. I'm like, oh, that's gonna save me so much time. I love finding stuff like that.
Yeah. Art shortcuts.
Yeah,
Best quality of life hacks that you'll ever
totally.
get. So for Worse Than Death, the story, did anything in particular inspire that story? Like any game, any movie?
Not games and movies, but real life. So I'm from a small town. I was born in northern Manitoba, but when I was 11, I moved to eastern Ontario into like a literal village, not like Resident Evil village style, but pretty close. And uh, one of the things was I missed my high school reunion
Oh,
because I had a family visit, and I remember being well, not upset, but I was like, "Damn it, I really want to go," because my small town is filled with a lot of weird characters, as all small towns are, and I was just so morbidly curious about who you would meet. So part of the idea behind Worse Than Death was, well, what if I had gone? And like what maybe this would have happened, like pretty wacky stuff. So I kept sort of daydreaming about like these silly horror versions of that scenario, and then that's sort of ballooned into what the game ended up becoming. But Home and Alone with You and Worse Than Death, as most people probably gathered, are all sort of set in the same universe, and they have callbacks to each other within them. And Worse Than Death is technically a sequel to Home, although it's obviously like different kind of town, different sort of characters. But as someone who grew up in a small town and experienced lots of small town horror stories about like real murders and just ghost stories and messed up stuff that just happens in every small town, all the inspiration I drew about like the characters, like they're all based on people that I knew or knew of. Um, and there's some stuff I wanted to put in the game that's probably like way more hardcore and mean spirited and like way more violent and messed up. And I just said that was all real, like based on real stuff. And I said, I can't do it. This is gonna it's gonna be someone's gonna give me a hard time about this, and they won't even realize like this is just shit that happens when you're in a small town.
Yeah, yeah. I also grew up in a very small town. Nothing much exciting happened there, no crimes or anything, except that's where people hid the bodies.
Right.
Like, literally more than
Yeah.
one. It was a little bit bonkers. So, small towns, they're not exciting until all of a sudden they are.
There's a CBC podcast called, or by Dave Origin called, oh, I totally forgot the name of it. It's like become super popular, like a true crime podcast where he tries to solve cold cases from around Canada, that are like 20 or 30 years old. One of them, one season is all about the town I was born
Oh my
in
god.
Manitoba. And my mom and brother and I were trading text messages because this when I was young, it was in the 80s. And they're like, oh, yeah, we remember this. Remember when the cops came to our house? Like, we remember hearing these stories, blah, blah, blah. And then the first season is all about something that happened in a town 20 minutes away from the town I grew up in, Ontario. And then other stuff is they're mentioning places and people, and I'm like, yep, I know where all this stuff is.
Oh, I should recommend that one to my mom. She'd get a kick out of it. Loves true crime, and she'll tell me where all the stuff happened as we
It's
drive
called
past.
Right. Someone Knows Something is what the original podcast is called, and he's got another
Ooh.
one on right now called the Next Call, which is his way of sort of continuing these stories during the pandemic when he doesn't have access to people like he did before.
Oh, wow. Yeah, I'll have to check that one out. For creating the story, is that like a collaborative process between you and your wife, or how do you guys kind of work out the beats of the story?
Yeah, we would generally have like we do what we call walk and talks where we do exactly that, and we sort of jam on stuff. And I'll talk about scenes, nothing organized, just things that I'm interested in having. Like, oh, that'd be great if we had a scene about this. That's like a thing that seems really important for this story. That's what I want. That's where I want this character to end up, or something I want to happen to these characters. And then we'll extrapolate from there and say, like, okay, so where are they coming from? Where are they going? What did they do before this? What are they going to do after? But the major thing about Worse Than Death that was different than the other two was I wanted to deconstruct how we created the game to make it a better experience in terms of actually developing. So because Home is like this really esoteric narrative-based game where the gameplay is constructing the narrative, that was sort of a weird bent, and there's a lot of learning behind how to do that. Alone with You is meant to be more of a straightforward narrative, but because it's got all these other characters and there's things that change depending on what you do in the game, that was a really long process to get the story sorted out. And I could honestly just do I have done entire talks about just how the story in that game was created because it's kind of nuts. But with Worse Than Death, I was like, okay, I want to make a new game. I don't want to spend 6 months of this development process worrying about story details. I want to figure those things out as we go so that I can just keep making stuff. So I took a page out of like old Nintendo design docs that I read about essentially just I was like, what's a cool place? Like this is a small town. I got like a map of the town in my head. What are cool places that we can put in that we haven't put in, like Home, for example.
Mhm.
So like the high school and a lumber yard, again, all based on my sort of town that I grew up in. We did a cemetery for the first time, like stuff like that. I was like, okay, let's go down the list and let's just check off like these are the levels I want to build. I definitely want to put in this lumberyard level. I want to put in the school. I want to put in originally it was supposed to be a seniors home, but it ended up becoming the hospital. A bunch of stuff like that. I'm like, yep, these are cool places to go to in this game. And
Mhm.
now I'm going to figure out how we get to them. So where are they going to be on this map, and why would someone need to go there? So, so the idea was to constantly bounce back and forth between story ideas that I have. Like a character has a story arc; they need to start at one place, end at another place. Things need to happen to them to sort of up and down to push them towards that eventual conclusion. So there are things I knew that I wanted to happen and twists I wanted to have in there, but there's also other details. I'm like, I don't, I'm still not sure how like um, like how does Flynn end up here when he was over there, that kind of thing. But I would say like if I sit here and worry about this is going to eat up 2 months of development when I need to be building these levels and giving art assets to the artist and then just designing puzzles and just putting stuff in that's fun and makes sense and is satisfying. So I said it's a gameplay first game where I'm going to figure out the levels and then go back to my story and make sure it all works. So if you're familiar with like comics, it's like the
Mhm.
old Marvel method that they were describing like the 70s and 80s of like you have an outline and then the artist just kind of blocks out what they think this is going to be to get you between these main story beats. And then the writer would come in and be like, oh, okay, well, let me put in the word balloons now that sort of help clarify what we're doing within these pages that you've blocked out. So I basically did it that way. And the thing that was really fun was that everything moved really fast. And I think it was a much stronger game. And there were things I did like a level that is the penultimate level was like in the middle. And what you did there was different. And there was designed to sort of achieve certain things. Then we changed that midway through. And it was really fun to have that flexibility to say, like, oh, no, no, we can use this level in this spot instead. Like, you come here. And it was essentially like editing a movie where you realize, like, oh, if you have a character go from this area to this area, it's like a boring, long, sequence.
Mhm.
But if we edit it differently and we cut this part in here and then you through, you know, put this original section a little bit further, like there's a sense of drama or urgency or whatever. So kind of did that real time throughout the whole process.
Well, that sounds like fun. Yeah, it sounds like you had a pretty good idea of the direction you wanted it to go. It was just making the puzzle pieces fit in where you needed them to go.
Yeah, I think one thing a lot of game devs can learn when writing stories is like you often want to write this specific tale, but I think what's important is to instead write who your characters are and then really understand them because then you can put them in any situation and go, well, what would they do in this spot? And that's kind of what we did. We would throw Holly into a different kind of situation than I intended and say, like, okay, well, what would she do? Like, is this the part where she freaks out, or is this like, is she cool with this? But this, this other situation is way too much for her to take, and that's where we're gonna have her, have like a really bad time and have to kind of crawl out of it. And then you don't get so hung up on like very specific details. You just kind of know the whys, and then you figure out the hows after.
Awesome. Next awesome part that I always love about every horror game, it always seems to be a staple, is the puzzles. And Worse Than Death has its share of puzzles. How do you go about creating those?
So I did a few things. There's often things that stick. Like there were often things that just came to me because of just jamming on the story. Like, oh, something like this would be cool. I want to do a thing with a heart or a skull. Whatever. And I write those down. But what I also did was bought a bunch of puzzle books of uh, like logic puzzles, um, yeah, logic puzzles, number puzzles, a bunch of things like that. And I remember learning a bunch of this stuff as like a teenager, trying to design puzzles for D&D games and stuff like that. And I would read these cryptology books and other things to be like how do you create a number sequence and how would you figure out how to like mess with people with language, that kind of stuff. So I basically bought books about this stuff and reread things and made lists, very organized, of like types of puzzles, logic puzzles, language puzzles, color puzzles, sound whatever, and just jammed on stuff and tried to pick from different columns and say like, okay, let's get one of those, let's get one of those, let's get one of those, and then we would look at them from a game design point of view of like, oh, there might be an accessibility issue if we do this because some people might not even be able to tell, if we're doing a puzzle that only uses sound or light or whatever, like there might be a problem with some players who wouldn't be able to perceive that, so that would sound like it probably wouldn't work quite as well, or it'd be less obvious if you can't have this because if you're playing without sound, which a lot of people do, you would miss clues, all that kind of stuff, and sort of whittle things down to that. And then we would whittle things down into gameplay things like rotation, just writing stuff down like rotation, moving a thing on another thing, switching the order of things, doing just math in your head, all that kind of stuff. And essentially just like these giant serial killer notebooks, scribbles about all that stuff. And then going like, oh, okay, so, example, there's a puzzle. There's a puzzle in the game that's like a pair of puzzles where you have to change dials, turn dials to the correct temperature. So there's a rotation aspect plus a logic aspect because you have to find a clue that requires you to take an extra step to figure out the answer to the clue, which then gives you the solution for the rotation. So there's like multiple steps and kind of just plan things out this way. And then we'd sort of look at them in order to say like, okay, this is the thing that makes sense at the beginning. This is a thing that makes sense at the end. Like the final puzzle of the game is trickier. It requires multiple steps. So it was just like looking at things and laying them out and trying to hopefully plan like a nice smooth difficulty curve.
Mm-hmm. That's so cool. I just try and think about how planning puzzles might work and it wrapping my head around working backwards from the solution. Just
It's
seems like a real different way of thinking.
it's super fun. And what I noticed, it was like a game dev education for myself was playing other games like Silent Hill games and whatnot. And I would do them and play them with a game dev mind and be like, wait a minute, all this is this. Like all I'm doing here is like rotating a stick and hitting one button when a color matches or whatever. I'm like, that sounds so stupid when you write it down. But it's the context of it and how it's presented and how you come up with the clues and how you find them as a player that makes it fulfilling. So
Mhm.
sometimes I would get hung up and be like, no one's going to want to do this. This is dumb. And then I would say, like, well, here are 5 other really good examples of this in other games. I'm pretty sure I can get away with this. Like, this is fine. I don't have to reinvent how the human mind works to create a fulfilling puzzle.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, context definitely kind of makes it better or makes you not overthink it.
Yeah, you can break it down. It's like what we talked about before about putting things into parts and realizing that when you're creating a thing, it's all about these like dry building blocks as
Mhm.
opposed to like it sounds really fun until you realize you're like, let's make sure all the squares, like all these gray squares, are lined up in ascending values of gray, so that makes sense to a player. And you break it down, it does get
Mhm.
that sort of boring behind the scenes. And then when you play it, you go like, oh, cool, people are getting the right reaction because we've considered these things correctly.
Cool. Yeah, it must be satisfying to see somebody go through and test out the puzzle and they manage to get through it without looking at you being like, what are you trying to do here?
There was one puzzle. There was one puzzle that we changed a little bit because we kept getting feedback in early tests that it was a little bit too obtuse. And there was one puzzle that one of our main testers, who normally just can like blaze through anything we throw at him, he was just like, I just don't get this, you
Oh
know.
no.
But then we would test with other people, and we're like, this is just one of those things where his brain is just not connecting the dots on this, which I understand because I played many games where I'm like, I just don't get it.
Mhm.
And everyone else in the world apparently is like, oh, like, oh, it's a color thing. And I'm like, huh? So there's some cases where we had to take a chance and say, this seems hard, but based on our feedback, like it's okay. It's People will figure it out. Maybe not everyone, but they eventually, most people will eventually figure it out.
We'll get there. Uh, are there any scary moments or spooky moments that you're super proud of in Worse Than Death?
Yeah, the you go to the trailer park and in the house there's a jump scare with a mirror that smashes. And that's probably my favorite one in the game. It might have been one of the first ones we did because I wanted to have like legit jump scares because I know everyone says they're cheap, but I call them uh, high value high value game development units.
Best bang for your buck.
That's right. And that was fun because we used like the physics engine in Game Maker to create like actual little particles that flew off and reacted correctly. And it was getting the timing right was super fun. And there's sort of like an unwritten rule in game design where it's like if you come up with a really good thing and implement it, don't just use it once because that's like a waste. There are some really amazing games that absolutely do that. Um, but that is the only time we ever do that. All the other jump scares are different. That and the screaming head. I really like that one.
Yeah.
Actually, I guess that's true. Technically, it's using the same system. I was like, I got
Nice.
to use this physics for something. So a giant screaming head would be pretty fun.
Nice. Did you ever get to have like the satisfaction of watching somebody play through that scare and like you get to see their reaction?
Absolutely. Yeah, yeah. Playtest, that was super fun. When we had some people like downstairs playtesting together, they maybe it'd be at two different parts of the game, but you with headphones on and you'd see them both reacting to the same thing. But to be honest, like I legit scare myself playing that game all the time. I just forget where things are, even though I've seen them a million times. And even to this day, like I'll play the game on Switch or just check something and I'll forget that there's like a really loud thing that happens at this, one moment or like the falling head thing and I'll go like, "Oh, I can't believe I punked myself in this stupid game."
You're just that good.
That's right.
Um, so I understand that there is also a comic book accompaniment to this game. Could you tell us a little bit about it?
Yeah, so when the game was in early concept stages, I always knew I wanted to do something comic book related with it. And, there's a lot of influence in the game from horror manga and just horror comics in general, like EC horror comics,
Hmm.
Tales of the Crypt, that kind of stuff. But that's why it's called Worse Than Death, like that cheesy sort of like in your face headline. And I knew I wanted to do something because I had been out of the comics game for a while. Since doing game dev, I hadn't released a new comic since again like 2008, or I think it was a re-release of Snow in 2010 or whatever it was. And I was like, it's been a long time since I've done a comic, and this is just cannot stand. And so I knew I wanted to do something, and I was hoping to get something done for launch. But again, as I mentioned, we launched on like 6 platforms almost simultaneously, which was not a smart idea. And at some point during that year, I was like, there was no way this comic book is getting done now. Nope. Like this is going to have to wait. So after we took our sort of break after launch, that's when I started plotting it out and looking at it and decided to make it a sequel, like a follow up. So, so yeah, the at TCAF, the Toronto Comics Arts Festival, in May of 2021, which was like a digital event, we officially launched Worse Than Death Volume One. So I'd been publishing some issues digitally and then released like the first 3 issues with a bunch of stuff. And that was sort of like, let's just see what happens because this is kind of fun and I wanted to release a new book. And that was fun. And there's a thing at the end of the book where it says like to be continued because I was like, is this going to continue? Am I going to work on something else for a while? I don't know, but I just had to at least get that part of the story was in my head. I had to get it out. So it was really fun to kind of like return to the roots and just keep going.
Yeah, and you left it open in case you ever have any ideas and you want to come back to it later.
Yeah, and it's like I actually really like the characters in the game a lot, and it was kind of fun to just revisit them and figure out like where they, what are they up to now? What's going on? Like what do you do after all the stuff that happens in the game? It's pretty nuts.
Mm-hmm. Uh, all right. And for my final question, what is up next, if whatever you feel like you're at liberty to say at the moment?
Right. So let's see what I can say now. So we are
Hmm.
working on our fourth original game. I don't know when we're going to be able to talk about that. It's going to be a while.
Hmm.
Maybe this year we'll get to mention it. I don't know. But we do have a couple other things planned for this year. We have one thing happening hopefully soon that I can't wait to talk about. That's been in the works for a while. Um, and that will be announced like before summer, I hope. And that's really cool. But we'll be a little cagey on the new game for a while because it is going to take a little bit longer to do. Over the winter of 20 2020 and leading into 2021, we actually did something that was new for us, which is create a gigantic tutorial for Game Maker Studio 2. So like when people download Game Maker, they like buy it. One of the first things you see on the start page is the tutorial that we created, which is this like epic, so long, um, tutorial called Little Town, which is meant to teach people how to use Game Maker, but also teach you how to sort of like design and think about things the way I would teach my students. And it's like got like 9 hours of video content that I made. Like it's absolutely bananas. And that's sort of a fun thing I hope people check out, especially if they, watch talks like this and think like, oh, I want to make something. And you're like, I don't know how to. You can just honestly just go load that up for free and check it out. I don't know. There may be some more content like that in the future, depending on who we talk to, because that's fun to do. But essentially, one thing to talk about hopefully soon, one new game that's going to take a while, and then probably a bunch of other stuff related to these other things in comic books and whatever throughout 2022.
Nice. So it's coming. Ominous.
I don't think we've ever. I think since 2012, we have not released like we have released something every single year, at least one thing every single year, whether it's like like a new port of the game or a new game, or some other update or whatnot. So it'll be no different this year.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for coming on stream with me. I know that I have a bunch of viewers here in the chat who are super jazzed to hear about your creative process. They were super jazzed to hear about how you create all your characters. Do you want to let everyone know where they can find you here online?
Yeah. So easiest way is go to Twitter. I'm at Benjamin Rivers. You can also go to Twitch, twitch.tv/Benjamin Rivers Inc. That's INC. But honestly, you know what? Just go to my Linktree. It's got links to BancyCo and everything. Just just go to linktree.com/Benjamin Rivers and you'll find everything. And I'm on Instagram and I do comics there and I'm all over the place.
Awesome. I've put your handle in the chat and I will stick all of my handles and stuff also in the chat. Thank you all for stopping by. Thank you, Ben. And
hey, thank you for having me.
Yeah. And we will see you guys next time. I will be streaming some more gaming stuff. We're going to try and finish Doki Doki on Thursday, hopefully, now that I have my voice back, because it was gone all weekend because I was sick. But yeah, we're going to be doing that 6:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. So I will see y'all then. Bye-bye.
Bye, everybody.